Have you ever wondered why the saxophone isn't a standard part of an orchestra? Like, it was patented in 1846. You will sometimes hear composers add them, and it's very, very cool. But why aren't they standard for anything written in the last century? Folks still consider them a new instrument, and sometimes it seems there's not much happening in the innovation of instruments. But in the world of electronics, nothing could be farther from the truth. Today, I'm speaking with a saxophone player about one of the newest innovations in wind instruments, the iwi, or electronic wind instrument. It's still not super new. It was invented in the 1970s, but here we are. It may not have a place in the symphony either, but in the world of video game music, it is absolutely everywhere. Welcome to Zeitgeist Radio, where we learn about musical subcultures from people in the scene. If you love this, be sure to subscribe, rate, and comment. Thanks so much. My guest today is Joe Newman, an arranger and performer out of the Bay Area in California. Joe, welcome to Zeitgeist Radio.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. So we have a lot of things we could talk about. How would you describe yourself musically? And then we'll go from there.
Yeah. So I'm a musician. I arrange, I perform, I occasionally produce. I have been doing, I'm trained as a jazz musician. That's what I studied in school. And, I play jazz saxophone and other sorts of woodwinds and, instruments in that space. But I've, over the last couple of years, really dug deep into the world of video game music, covers of video game tunes, doing a little bit of composing for games and performing game music live, both at video game events, but also at sort of traditional music venues with some jazz jam type things. So it's just been really kind of digging into this music because it's just a wonderful community and wonderful little subculture of the music scene here.
Yeah. So I asked Stemage this a couple episodes ago as well, and I would love to hear from you. So a lot of people play video games, but there's that jump between like, oh, I'm playing the game to like, oh, the music is like its own thing. So do you remember like what first brought you to video game music as a thing outside the game itself versus just
Sure.
playing around,
Well, I think I like probably a lot of nerdy kids who pick up an instrument in like fourth grade. Like the very first thing that you do once you learn how to play, hot cross buns is you play like the Mario theme, or you just see what tunes that you can play. And I grew up playing a bunch of video games, and so that was the sort of first foray into it. And then of course, the joke is that you're improvising a jazz tune and then you throw in a video game reference, and then you're kind of off to the races, where you kind of get into that. For me, obviously I grew up listening to this stuff and it's part of my musical vocabulary in a very kind of permanent and impossible to detangle way. But for me, it was going to an event called MagFest, which I think Savage probably talked about, or that was where it was like a thing. You go to there and you see people actually performing this music live, and just absolutely stellar musicians at the top of their craft, making this music and making it come alive. And then it's like, oh yeah, okay, this is a scene that I'm into.
So you must have gone to, if you say MagFest, that's the one in like on the other side. We're in California now, but like MagFest, the original Mid-Atlantic gaming convention. So were you over there, or did you like travel all the way there from here?
No, I was super lucky to grow up in Bethesda, Maryland. So I was able to literally just metro over. So I went to, I think it was MagFest 6. Now we're on like MagFest 21 or something. So I've been going for a while, and just very lucky to kind of stumble upon it, just to be like, oh, there's this cool, weird nerd thing happening. And I was on break from college, and I wanted to just see some nerd stuff. And then just to kind of get my mind blown by it year over year. Sometimes I was more excited to go for the nerd stuff, and sometimes, it took a while actually for me to care about the music, to be frank, because it wasn't, because a lot of the early acts that I saw were like metal acts or, you know, hard rock acts, which, was fine, but as a jazz musician, it wasn't like that exciting to me. I will say, and shout out to them. The Super Soul Bros was the band that kind of really sort of made me go wow, like, because just you know they were playing soul music and jazz music and horns and just incredible talent, and they have been an inspiration for a lot. And a lot of my musical journey, just seeing how good they are and how wonderful of a show they put on for so many years.
And now Circle of Life.
I know, and now I got to play with them. That was very much. I was trying not to just fanboy out there on stage, but I got to sit in with them this year at MagWest, and I got to arrange a song where they recorded on it, and that was a huge song for me, and we got nominated for cover of the year, and like all this sort of stuff. Yeah, it's a small world, and if you stick around long enough and you keep kind of grinding, you eventually get to meet these people and play with them, and they're all awesome and all super nerdy and fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, one of the instruments that you play is called an iwi. What was first of all, can you explain what the heck that is? Because I don't think very many people have even seen it. And then secondly, how did you encounter it the first time?
Yeah. So the iwi, it stands for electronic wind instrument. There are a number of sort of wind synths out there. The iwi is sort of shorthand for all of them, but there are technically other ones. There's like the Roland Aerophone, which a friend of mine uses, and a bunch of different ones. But the Akai iwi is sort of the most well known. It is essentially a woodwind instrument, like in terms of fingering and more or less how you approach it. But it's a synthesizer. And so you're controlling it, with a combination of your fingers and the breath going through the instrument. So you have a lot of the same sort of expressive capabilities of, a saxophone or a clarinet or some similar thing, but it's a digital signal that's coming out. So you can do all sorts of fun things with it in terms of assigning it to whatever sort of MIDI instrument or synthesized instrument that you want. So I discovered iwi. Probably it was a combination of two things. One was the pandemic, because I had a small child in basically a one bedroom, or I guess it was two bedroom, and I needed a way to practice without waking her from her nap. So I was like, maybe I should try and get a wind synth because I can wear headphones. It was a very like a practical, like, I had played with, wind synths before in like, music shops as a novelty. And I played on some bad ones and I found that I didn't like, it wasn't for me. But it was only because they were bad ones. Right. So like,
how did you know? What makes it a bad one?
Because there was latency. So, the bad ones, just the amount of time it takes for it to register a note. If it's not instantaneous, then it doesn't feel good to play.
Sure.
I also watched a YouTube video from a guy named Carlos Aini. I can't remember. He goes by the name Insane in the Rain as his sort of YouTube. Also a big guy in the video game music scene. And he put out a whole instructional video on like how to choose an iwi, what iwis are good. And he recommended, the Akai iwi 4000S as the iwi to get, which made it a lot simpler because I just went out and I live in San Francisco, and I literally just searched for like somebody selling an iwi 4000S in the Bay Area, and there was somebody selling it. And, and so I met him. I got a really good deal on it because probably like me, he didn't know how to use it and he gave up on it. And when I got it out of the box, the first notes or couple notes I played on it, I was like, oh, this was a waste of $300. And it was only kind of out of necessity that I went into like Googled the Akai EWI 4000S instruction manual and actually figured out what knobs you have to turn and what settings you have to set to actually make it responsive. But once I did that, then I was just off to the races because I was like, oh, this is really fun. This is a really fun instrument to play once you've configured it.
So you play saxophone. Are the fingerings, are you able to configure it so it's the same fingerings, or did you have to learn new fingerings?
It is almost identical to saxophone. There's a little bit of difference here and there. What I've learned over the years of playing it is that there are certain things that a saxophone does better than an iwi and vice versa. And they just little nuances of the instruments. Certain things, certain trills are easier. Conceptually, the iwi has an 8-octave range compared to the saxophone, where going, any higher requires a tremendous amount of practice and skill in the altissimo. So you can really kind of abuse that if you're playing iwi. Basically, all you do is you do like a single pattern and you take it up 8 octaves. It sounds incredible and everybody's really impressed, but I'm not doing anything. I'm just doing the same pattern and I'm moving the octave roller over and over. So it's one of those things where it feels like a cheat in some ways. But then there are things that are really hard on iwi, just trilling certain notes. And playing expressively because you don't have the same amount of like breath control. You have to bend notes sort of manually. So it's one of those things where like certain things are way easier on a saxophone, certain things are way easier on an iwi, and it's very idiosyncratic.
Yeah. So my brain is having trouble with the breath part of it. Something like a keytar makes a lot of sense to me. You push, you program a sound to a button, you push the button, that sound comes out. Do you know anything about how the mechanism works to like where the breath connects and how that actually like, because it's not, you're pushing the buttons, but you're also giving input through your breath. And I'm assuming there's some sort of expressive input like with a wind instrument, saxophone or clarinet.
Yeah. I mean, I don't profess to be an expert on the inner workings, but it's basically, it's sensing how hard the air is hitting the sensor.
Yeah.
Right. So the more air you put into it, the louder, or, it just the same way that if you were using like a keyboard and you had an expression pedal, or like I guess maybe an organ, and you were just pumping the pedal to give more, volume or air to it. It's the same sort of concept.
Sure.
Or I also play a lot of melodica, which is a sort of like a little handheld keyboard that has a tube and a mouthpiece. It's a similar sort of concept of you can hold a note and then you can just put more or less air into the tube to just make the note sound, more or less. It's kind of just dynamic range.
Nice. Okay, well, that makes a lot of sense now. I know there's a sensor for that. How about, what do you do for programming? Like, because I'm assuming it came with a set of sounds. How much do you mess with that? Do you put new sounds in all the time, or like, how flexible is it as you're playing?
Yeah, that's a great question, because this is where I worried that I was going to go down the deep end. And this is where Carlos's video was really instructive to me. Because he was like, the biggest difference and why the 4000S is the model to get compared to the newer models, which will have, maybe better onboard sounds. But the 4000S is the sort of the holy grail one to get because it actually allows you to edit the onboard synths. You can always use it as a MIDI controller, and you can always kind of program it to sound like a MIDI instrument, but that's not always great for live performance, because then you also like have to have a MIDI interface and like a computer that it's hooked up to. But also, and this was kind of like an aesthetic point, but like if you play an iwi using sounds that are trying to emulate acoustic instruments, it's kind of gonna sound dumb.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Like, because the best case scenario, it's like, well, you could have just played an acoustic instrument.
Yeah.
So So his philosophy that I totally agree with is just make it sound like a really cool synth, and lean into the digital synthy nature of it because that is cool and that sort of makes it unique. And so the 4000S, there's a guy um, on the internet whose name is Matt Patchman or something. Patchman is his last name, but he is legend in the music scene because he has created his own sort of custom synths for the eWeave 4000S that you can download. You pay like 30, $50 for it or whatever for the download. And it's a one-time sort of download patch, and you put it onto your 4000S and it sounds great. And it completely replaces all of the sounds that it came with these Patchman sounds. And if you talk to an EWE player, the same way that like, there's like a cult of personality around like saxophones with like, oh, I've got a Selmer 6 or whatever. The EWE 4000S with the Patchman sound bank. That is like, that's the thing that you need to get if you're going to be a professional EWE player. And it's just kind of funny that there's like that's what you get. And then it sounds great and you're good. So to answer your original question, like the amount of experimentation I do is pretty limited to just picking from the 100, because the Patchman sound bank comes with 100 different sounds. Like there's a lot to choose from. And so I pick out the, 5 or 6 patches that I like the most within that, to use.
Nice.
I haven't gotten fully down the rabbit hole of tweaking each individual synth parameter, but I could if I wanted to.
Can you change them while you're playing, or do you have to like take a minute?
You can change your patch very quickly. So you can, and there are actually ways within the EV4000S that you can program specific patch changes to like note combinations. So you like press down a button and then you finger like a C, and that's going to change the patch on the fly. I have a friend named Steven who's like, that's a big part of his sort of improvisational technique, is that he will switch instruments mid-line, which is very cool and trippy. And I think that's there's a lot of fun showing off type stuff that you can do with the EWE if you are willing to go deep into the rabbit hole and nerd out on it.
Yeah. So in the EWE community, since you brought that up, how would you know if you were walking up like and seeing a band play, like what do you appreciate in a player if you're like watching them and you're like, what types of things are you noticing where you're like, oh yeah, this person is clearly experienced with this instrument?
I mean, there are a couple things. One is just any instrument. How good are you at playing the instrument? Like,
right.
And I mean, there are ways that the EWE can be used to, like I said, there are cheats where you can just do the same pattern and just go crazy with the octaves. But again, I think that if it's done musically, it can be really cool and really fun. I think when I'm listening to any sort of horn or any sort of melodic instrument playing, I want to just see how good their sense of time is and their lines and their vocabulary or whatever. But I do think that every really good EWE player that I've seen has found some way to lean into the weird, fun technological aspect of it. I have mine, and it's not even musical. I don't know if you've seen this, but I've actually hooked up LEDs to my EWE. And because nobody really knows what an EWE is supposed to look like, they don't know that the LEDs have been sort of Velcroed onto it. So it's always my favorite thing to do. It's not appropriate for a jazz gig, but occasionally for like a rock gig when I'm playing EWE, I will wait until the climax of the song. I'll hold a high note and then I'll push a button on the EWE to trigger the LEDs, which light up the whole thing like a Christmas tree. And it's just always gets a great reaction. It's always really fun. And
that's great.
It's a nice surprise.
Nice. So I was surprised by it. So that's awesome. We've been talking about you in context of jazz, but then you mentioned a couple other genres. Do you play EWE in other genres or saxophone?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, one of the things about the video game music scene is that it really covers all of the different genres. And playing traditional jazz is cool, and that's one thing that you can do. But like, anywhere a saxophone could fit, and plenty of places where it doesn't fit, I still get asked to play and to contribute to that, because it's fun. It's always fun to kind of hop in on tunes and sort of contribute to that sound. So yeah, I mean, I'll play iwi in a rock setting for sure. I haven't played metal iwi, but there's a lot. There's a lot of situations where the iwi can be kind of fun. One of the things I'll do is, because again, with that 8-octave range, you can actually play bass pretty easily on iwi. And so there will be times when I'm with my band and I take over for the bassist. I give the bassist a break and I just start doing walking bass lines on the synth, and it's fun. I mean, it's horn players don't usually get to cover the bass parts, but it's really I enjoy playing that that type of stuff a lot.
I gotta say, just watching. So this was my first MagWest. And there was just so much to take in, but I kept seeing iwis around. And again, I have a friend here I'm friends with. I don't know if you know Warrior Bob. He's been around the scene for a while. Anyway, he has one that he's learning to play kind of casually, but that's the only person I've ever met in my life. I'd never even heard of this instrument. And then all of a sudden they are on every stage. They are everywhere. And I'm like, what is going on? They were replacing trumpets. They were replacing like saxophone. Like they were everywhere. And the sounds that came out of them were completely different. It was so interesting. There was one I wanted to ask you about, an effect, because again, relating to like the air moving in. Okay, there's a sensor that can sense how strong the air is going and give some change the sound that way. What the heck happened when that guy started scatting into a microphone?
Yeah.
What was that?
Trevor. Yeah, that's Trevor from Character Select. Yeah, so everybody's got their sort of thing. Trevor's is he does the vocoder, and he does a fantastic job with it too. So again, because it's a digital signal, and you can do all sorts of fun stuff with digital signals. You can run it through pedals, you can run it through distortion, you can do delay, chorus, or whatever. And what Trevor, I don't know if he discovered the technique, but he's really good at it, is you can run it through a vocoder, which means that essentially you're using the iwi to control the pitch of the tone, but you are speaking into a microphone that's actually shaping the words. And it's the same way that like a talk box or a vocoder would work if you were doing it in a synth. So like it's not like that revolutionary. You could do it on a keyboard, but because he's such an amazing saxophonist, he's able to basically scat solos and shape the sound. So he's speaking words as he's improvising these solos. And it's just a really cool effect.
So he wasn't. So the pitch was not coming from him singing the pitch. He was playing.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So he was basically just shouting but words, and then the pitch was getting altered based off of what the iwi synth was producing. I think he could probably sing too, but you get the robot sounding voice. Doing that, and it's just a really cool effect. I don't have a vocoder, but I don't want to really steal Trevor's shtick, but I do think what he does is really, really cool. It's really fun.
It was the input, right? The input is fascinating to me. I just don't know that much about it. So yeah, that was pretty cool to see too. Let's shift gears over into your performance a little bit more. Thank you for indulging me.
Yeah.
This
The iwi is a fun instrument. It's just a really cool, like, idiosyncratic thing.
What would you say you play the most as far as instruments go? Do you mostly play sax, or have you started playing more iwi than sax, or where are you at right now?
I'd say I still consider myself a saxophonist, first and foremost, and that's what I spent the most time training and learning. I have the whole kind of arsenal of saxophones now at my disposal. When I was in high school. I started on alto. I got forced to play Barry, which was an interest. I was kind of scrawny high school kid, so like that Barry was as big as I was. But holy cow, what an amazing instrument to play when you're in high school, because like on some level, it is so hard to play and it is so niche to play that you can't do the sorts of shredding things that alto or tenor players can do. So it really forces you to learn like tone and rhythm and like lyricism. And I'm actually so grateful that I got to play Barry for so much of my high school career, because I feel like it trains you in a different way.
Yeah.
But of course, I also play alto and tenor, and I have a soprano, and there will be times when I'm recording where I'll record all four instruments and at once, and
because shredding is fun too.
Yeah, of course. And it's a lot easier to bring an alto to a gig than a Barry.
Yes.
Lugging them around is harder. So I play saxophone. I also play a lot of keys, and every once in a while I'll do some vocals or stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, I consider myself a saxophonist. It's kind of what I think most people know me for.
My brain is spinning with all these electronic possibilities married to instruments I am familiar with. The iwi makes it possible for the player to really expand what they're capable of, filling in on bass, or wailing away 8 octaves higher than you'd be able to on a wind instrument. I gotta tell you, if you've never heard of this before, definitely check it out. There are a ton of videos on YouTube that you can watch to get a sense of what is possible with this instrument. But now that we've heard a little bit about what the instrument is, let's hear a little from Joe about where he might play it, because it turns out Joe is involved in some really cool projects in a very particular niche of the internet, and also some live stuff in San Francisco. See, at his heart, Joe is a jazz guy, and what do jazz folks love more than anything else? To get creative with other jazz folks. He just happens to have beeps and boops and LED lights, in addition to his saxophone, in his creative toolkit. If you love this, be sure to subscribe, rate, and comment. Thanks so much. But enough from me. Let's hear about all of this from Joe.
Dwelling of Duels. What is Dwelling of Duels?
Mm-hmm. So Dwelling of Duels is a monthly video game arranging, like a video game cover arranging competition. It's a friendly competition. There's no prize except for bragging rights, and you get some plugins if you win. But generally speaking, it's just a community of really, really passionate arrangers and producers and performers who get together every month. The people who run it, they'll on the first of the month they'll say a theme. The theme is Mega Man month, or party game month, or games that were on the N64 or whatever. And everyone has a month from the day the theme is announced to just create a song that fits that theme. And we submit them all anonymously. And then at the end of the month, we have a big listening party, and we all vote anonymously on the tracks. And then, they reveal the results, and we start the process all over again. I discovered Dwelling of Duels a couple of years ago, again, during the pandemic. That was, the pandemic was what, had a big impact on me as a musician, because I had previously just been a jazz musician who would go out and gig and, just play jazz standards or whatever. And couldn't do that.
Yeah.
Both because of COVID, but also because I had just had my first kid. And so, being stuck inside, I just couldn't do anything. And, I reached out on a random Facebook group to do some recording stuff. And the guy after the recording was like, "Hey, do you want to join me and do this Dwelling of Duels thing?" And I did. And, we did this track, which the first track we did was it was an Animal Crossing track. And I, in fact, coincidentally did put some talk box on that track. But, and it did well. And, the songs that I heard in that listening party blew me away. It's a small community of only, 30, 40 people. But the talent and the caliber of the musicianship is unlike anything. One of the guy who currently holds the record for most gold medals is Tony Dickinson, he's the bassist for the Trans-Siberian Orchestra. Like that's the level of, and like a
Nice.
full on professional producer. Like Dwelling of Duels has produced, like it is some of its alumni, because it's been going on for over 20 years. Um, and like some of its alumni go on to make games for, music for games, or they go on to perform at the main stage of MagFest, or etc. And so just the talent there is incredible. And so being a saxophone player, it's very easy for me to collaborate, and so I get asked to join and do stuff. And then I over time got the confidence to start arranging my own stuff and asking people to be part of it. And then I was just off to the races.
Nice. What did that look like as far as arranging? Like when you decided to start, how did you approach that?
Yeah. So I remember, because one of the things that's interesting about Dwelling of Duels is, again, like you were mentioning before, like it's very genre agnostic.
Yeah.
There's a traditional, like it has sort of roots in the metal, rock, shreddy, guitar heavy type of stuff. But it has really expanded. Like we've got harp solos, and we've got, vocal tunes, and, synth pop, and just whatever. And as a result, also, I will sometimes collaborate with people who don't even read music. And they'll just be like, here's the demo. Can you just play on it? And I was like, cool. Yes. And so for me, it was very challenging to arrange for those musicians, because I prepared sheet music for them, which was totally necessary. And I learned, I learned over time, like, oh, this is really more about like the collaboration, and how do you actually work with people who are often not even in your time zone. One of the songs I'm actually most proud of is a collaboration I did. It was a Splatoon cover, and it was with a friend of mine who is a saxophone player who lives in Israel. And we recorded as if we were in the same room trading solos, but it was completely asynchronous.
Oh, wow.
So we were trading fours. So I would start a phrase, and then I would leave some space on the recording, and then he would respond to that phrase a week later. And then I'd go back and I'd redo the phrase, so it kind of seemed like I was responding to him. And it's completely faked, but if you listen to it, it seems like we are right in the same room talking to each other. And it's really, really fun. And that's one of the things that you kind of learn when you're in the producing and arranging phases, like just ways that you can collaborate remotely.
Yeah, that sounds hard.
It was so much fun. It was so rewarding. And it really does, you have the benefit of getting to do multiple takes, and you kind of get to think it through. But ultimately, if you work at it, it still sounds spontaneous, and it still has that sort of live energy to it, which I just think is super fun.
And you find these people just from like knowing the scene and going to these listening parties and watching other people perform and seeing who's who on the tracks?
Yeah, absolutely. We all have a Discord. We hang out. Some of my very closest friends, we talk all the time about everything. Sometimes we, play games. Sometimes we meet up in person. If I'm ever in town, and I know that a friend of mine from Dwelling of Duels is there, we'll meet up, and our kids will talk and all that kind of stuff. Some good dads and moms and parents in the DoD community, it's great. It's been really super.
Yeah, that's awesome. So completely virtual.
Yeah, except that we all do meet up in person at MagFest and MagWest, whoever, like sure. That tends to be like a gathering. It was super fun. Like, MagWest this year, I got to play with the Tiberian Sons.
Cool.
For their main stage set. Yeah. And what was amazing is that I had known them for years through Dwelling of Duels, but it was the first time I'd actually met them in person. And it was, we hugged, and then we immediately went to sound check, and we were just performing on stage, having only like actually seen each other in the flesh for like 24 hours. And that's just really special. That's really cool.
I missed I was driving up that night, but my buddy Warrior Bob was there, and like that was the one that he was like, I gotta see that one. And I did buy their. I went to their panel late the next day, and I bought their album, and I'm like, wow, these guys are like,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, really good. Just absolutely incredible performers, arrangers, producers, the whole nine yards. I mean, it's impossible to watch that show and not come away like, oh wow, impressed.
Yeah, I didn't even watch the show, and I was impressed.
Yeah, totally.
It's awesome you got to play with them. So when you're arranging for these games, so there's a theme. Do you pull like melodies from the game, or like how do you approach like how you're going to conceptualize your arrangements?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, you know, from my perspective, everybody in DoD has a slightly different arrangement style, and for me, most of the songs that I arrange are games or songs that I have known for years. Songs that I have already an emotional connection with, or, because I played the game or just because I knew the song or whatever. Very rarely will I arrange a song that I don't already have feelings about. And usually, what I am trying to do in the arrangement is to either amplify or comment on my existing emotional attachment to the song.
Nice.
And one of the things that I talk about in Dwelling of Duels a ton is the head, the heart, the butt, and the laugh. Those are the sort of four elements to any arrangement. Like you can really, and you don't need to have all four. But if you do have all four, then that's like a recipe for a winning track. Like if you have been engaged with your mind and are doing something clever and interesting, or, technically cool. If you've also sort of captured the heart and soul of the arrangement, and, it feels like something that's you put passion into. And then the butt, always important. It has to be grooving. It's possible to win DoD without having a grooving track, but it's very difficult. And then the laugh. I think that's there's an inherent silliness to what we are doing.
Yeah.
That because we're taking songs from games and playful, Mario jumping on turtles or whatever, and we're trying to, turn it into, these grand musical statements. I think if you don't take it that seriously and you actually just lean into the fun of it, it just makes for a really, really enjoyable track. So those are the sort of elements that I'm trying to, pursue when I'm doing an arrangement.
I love that formula. That is awesome. What happens? These are every single month. What happens if you haven't played the game or don't know the theme? Do you still arrange? Or do you just pass on that one?
Well, I've been trying not to kill myself with arranging and performing every month. It is a lot of work.
Sure.
But again, what I find actually super fulfilling and really, really fun is on the months that I don't arrange, I collaborate.
Cool.
So my friends will reach out to me and they'll say, "Hey, I'm working on this song. Can you lend saxophone to it?" And oftentimes I've never played the game and never heard it. I'll listen to the song and I'll be like, "Oh yeah, that's cool." Or I'll just, I just want to help out a friend. A lot of my favorite sort of tunes have come out of just saying yes to those sorts of collaborations and doing that. It's a very sort of community focused type of organization, which is great.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Have you ever won?
I have won a handful.
Nice. Good
I
job.
don't want to brag.
You really won.
I've won a lot. I have the third most gold medals behind.
Oh my gosh, I'm talking to a superstar here. That's awesome.
Like I said, it's a small community. I do win from time to time, and I've often I'm kind of somewhat unique in the DoD community in that I have basically all of my tracks are collaborations. If I'm doing a solo track, it'll be sort of as a joke alt entry that isn't for competition. For me, I'm always looking to collaborate because as a saxophone player, you can't even you can't, you can do synths and you can program drums or whatever, but like for me, it is the way that I arrange is I arrange for a full band. So I have to get my friends together. I want to, get a full band sound, which requires a lot of collaborators. And fortunately, I have incredible, wonderful, tremendous collaborators who elevate everything I do. And that's why I keep doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. You still play jazz. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so another project that we were talking about, you do a lot. and let's just comment, this isn't even your day job, right?
No, I have a demanding day job as a lawyer and working a startup. But yeah, this is a hobby I really care a lot about, and I'm grateful that I have the ability to pursue.
Yeah. So you started a jazz jam, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
In San Francisco. Again, video game themed. Can you tell me a little bit about your jam?
Yeah, absolutely. So I, again, this is before the pandemic. I would play in a jazz combo. We would just play gigs around the city and doing jazz standards. And again, the way that me and the bass player of this combo bonded was that we were both nerds, and we would slip in little video game quotes here and there for our own amusement, and the audience wouldn't know, but we would know. And as the pandemic started to ease up, and as like gigs were starting to happen again, I reached out to this bass player. I was like, there are people who are doing video game jazz jams. And we were certainly not the first people to come up with the idea. That it was a big thing in the New York scene. A friend of mine, Don Palombi, was kind of like one of the pioneers in that space. But we're like, we could probably try and do that here. And John John Harris, my bassist, to his credit, he's like, I know people. Let's call him up. And we had a rehearsal, and we played a bunch of video game tunes, and we relied heavily on this website, which is a publicly available resource of video game sheet music called bgleadsheets.com.
Nice.
Which is a tremendous, it's like the real book, but for video game music.
Nice.
And really grateful to have all that. And then we called up a venue that both John and I had played at a bunch, and we're like, do you want to try this? And they're like, yeah, sure. And we've been doing it every month for almost 2 years now. And it's just really cool. We all honestly expected it to be harder.
Yeah.
We expected it to be harder to find an audience for it. We expected it to be harder to find a venue. But chalk it up to the Bay Area and San Francisco, and there just being a lot of nerds here. And I'll toot my horn a little bit. Like we do put on a good show, and it's seasoned jazz musicians. Like it's people who are otherwise known entities in the Bay Area jazz community.
Yeah.
We're able to get people to show up with mostly just word of mouth, and the Ocean Ale House, which is where we play in San Francisco. They're just a fantastic venue. The owners are super supportive. The owner, the guy who runs it, his name is Miles. He jumps in and plays drums with us because he's a killer drummer.
Nice.
And yeah, this been really super, super fulfilling and surprising to me. I didn't know or think that it would exist and have the staying power that it did. But it's very meaningful to me that we're kind of building this community, because I know that it is exactly the kind of community that I would have wanted when I was learning my instrument.
Yeah.
I don't have a chip on my shoulder like everybody, but there are certainly jazz musicians that scoff a little bit at video game music as being not serious in certain places. And I just and I'm from Maryland, which the DC jazz scene is also kind of a little snooty. But in the Bay Area, everybody's super cool about it. Everybody just You know, we have people from like KCSM and like legit jazz people who have no idea, have never played a video game. Our trumpet player had never played a video game and he loves it. He comes every, you know, almost every month and he plays and he's just like, I just like these tunes. They're fun to play on.
So do you have the sheets? They must have the lead sheets there, or do you prep in advance?
We have iPads that have VG lead sheets on them for when we open it up. So we play from 6 to 9, like from 6 to 7 or so is the house band set. So that's like rehearsed songs that we've played before, you know, just the house band, professional musicians. That's also where we'll probably do some custom arrangements that aren't in the book that we wanted to play. And then we open it up to the jam. And so everybody who is listening to the house band, they come up, they've had a drink or two, and then it kind of devolves into mostly controlled chaos for the last couple hours. And everybody gets a good chance to play, and we just call tunes whatever people want to hear.
Nice. So the quoting, that's funny that because I know that jazz musicians do that all the time in jazz land. The quoting of like, tossing in, you know, little bits of, you know, whoever here and there. How often would you say the audience gets it?
Depends on the audience. But I think playing these ultra combo gigs and playing at MagWest, there are certain lines that you can quote that people will always recognize and react to. It is a sort of shared vocabulary that everybody kind of you know can get a wink and enjoy out of. You know, there's a funness to that. You know, some quotes are more subtle than others. Some are just kind of for your own benefit or for maybe 2 or 4 people in the audience. But
yeah. Oh, well, that's super fun. We could talk for a long time, but I want to ask one final question, which I ask every guest at the end of the episode. So do you know what zeitgeist means? This is Zeitgeist Radio. So zeitgeist, spirit of the times. There's a moment that I like to call a zeitgeist moment where this is a musical podcast. You're making music or listening or somehow interacting with music. And, you know, when you just like plug in and you just like, you connect to that broader, the spirit of the times like that you're in, whether it's in that moment or connecting to a history or whatever, but that sense of being part of something larger than yourself. I call that a zeitgeist moment.
I like that.
So I will ask you, what was either a recent or a particularly memorable zeitgeist moment for you? While you're thinking of that, I'll share one. And it was actually listening to Super Soul Bros at MagWest. That was, so I'm classically trained and have collaborated with a lot of different people. I've done some vocal jazz. And I know more people in the classical and jazz world. I feel like there's kind of more of a mesh there. And they were playing at the poolside and at MagWest, and I had heard a lot of rock and a lot of metal.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until like I was having conversations with friends and meeting new people, and I had to like stop and, you know, just like, okay, hold on, I got to listen to these guys. Because the level of like, it was some of the best jazz I've ever heard in my life at that poolside. And it kind of like shifted my perception of the event and just kind of who was around me, from like, oh, this is a bunch of rocker nerds, which is awesome. I love rocker nerds too, to like, I don't know, I could relate to it in a different way.
That's the Super Soul Bros effect.
Yeah, their keys guy, like, because again, I play keys, and like I was mind blown by what was happening there, and just the shifting people coming in and out, and every single person who walked in was so talented. Like, it was the best jazz show I've seen in a long time. And here I was at a video. It was so out of what I expected, out of left field for my expectations for the event, that I suddenly felt like I belonged a lot more, and I felt like I could relate and be part of it and connect to people in a way that I hadn't expected to walking into that event. So it's just kind of for me at that poolside.
I mean, that's a great, and that's, I mean, you're describing literally exactly the way I felt when I saw my first Soul Bro show.
Sure.
Because they've been that good forever, and it's like it's kind of annoying. But they are just absolute. I don't want to. I do want to gush. They're incredible inspirations to me, and
Yeah.
like, you know, I've been so lucky to not only get to, you know, hang with them, but to, like, you know, to share a stage with them, to perform with them, to just actually go get, you know, tacos with them,
Yeah.
because they're great people and they're great hangs, and you know, um, you know, it's just they're very inspirational people to be around. I mean, I'm going to try and answer your question about the zeitgeist. I'm going to crib very, very heavily from another person who, you know, is a name in our scene, Charlie Rosen of the 8-Bit Big Band. You know, he's very much, you know, in the zeitgeist. He's a Grammy winner for, you know, video game music.
Nice.
You know, and very much a big shot. But he gave an interview that I think was really, him and Adam Neely, who's another YouTube person, talked about actually how video game music connects with jazz history. And that really connected some dots for me. So I'll paraphrase what he said because he said it better. But, you know, in the old days, in the jazz tradition, in like the 1940s and 50s, what was bebop? What was Charlie Parker and Cannonball Adderley doing? They were actually, generally, they were playing show tunes. They were playing, you know, My One and Only Love, Misty, you know, Autumn Leaves. I think even like these were all songs that were on Broadway.
Yeah.
That because they were the pop music of the day, and they were the songs that if you played in a club, people would recognize because they were the zeitgeist, to use your term.
Yeah.
And, you know, and these jazz musicians were just kind of riffing off of the pop music. And if you look at today, well, I mean, no shade on Broadway, but there just isn't new Broadway music anymore. Like it's all adaptations and all whatever. But like, what are the songs that people know? Well, they know pop music, sure, but then they know video game music. And that is, and if you look at the way that video game music, particularly classic, like NES, Super NES, Genesis era music, it was built like show tunes were built, looping forms, AABA formats, you know, really cool progressions and chord changes and super recognizable melodies. Like the restraints of the hardware forced the music to be actually really, really good for jazz.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, from my perspective, what we are doing by doing this video game jazz is carrying on very much that jazz tradition for a new generation. I mean, I feel like I'm kind of overselling it a little bit, but like that's how I feel about it.
Yeah,
I mean,
that makes sense. I'd never thought about it that way. Yeah.
So for me, when I heard that interview, and that's sort of what made it click for me. It's like, oh, right. This is what jazz has always been about, actually. It's always been about taking what exists already in pop culture and then riffing on it, putting your own spin on it, making it collaborative, making it fun, making it accessible to the audience in this different way, and really connecting with the music on a deep level. So when I heard that, that's when the light bulbs went out. And, you know, again, I'll give one more shout out to the Soul Bros, but they've been doing that for, you know, 20 years. And they've been connecting to the music and making it real in a way that has resonated with people. So, you know, to be part of that tradition is really cool.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. You're like stretching across time. That's awesome. Well, Joe, thank you so much for being on my podcast. Really
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you again for talking to me.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Zeitgeist Radio. Please make sure to follow the podcast on your podcast app. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram at Zeitgeist Academy, and you can always email me at info@zeitgeistacademy.com. I love hearing from you. Music for this episode was created by Ian Boswell. Please hit that subscribe button and tell all your friends you found a cool new podcast. See you next time.